At the end of last year, the German governing coalition of the SPD, Green Party, and FDP collapsed, leading to early elections being called for the 23rd of February 2025. These elections ended up having the highest turnout since German reunification, finishing at 82.5% of the voting eligible population, making it a historic election, though there appears to be plenty of that going around these days. However, before talking about the results, I'm going to give some context for how the German election system works. For those watching instead of just listening, this is what a ballot looks like in Germany's federal elections. On the left-hand side is a list of candidates for the electoral district that the voting booth is in and the party they represent. On the right-hand side is a list of parties running nationally. The way this system works has changed over the years, and the current system is a bit more complex than I'll describe here, but generally speaking, the national distribution of votes made on the right-hand side determines how many seats each party receives in the Bundestag, Germany's elected federal parliament, and the left-hand side determines the priority of filling those seats, with additional candidates lists per region in case a party runs out of constituency candidates. This mixed system has several important implications, like the fact that the CDU does not run any constituency candidates or even show up on the national ballot in the state of Bavaria, where instead its more conservative sister party, CSU, runs. By the way, thanks for watching up to this point. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. It helps prioritize this video in the YouTube algorithm. Now moving on, there are two main caveats to this whole system. One is that parties that represent minority groups, like the regionalist South-Schleswig Voters Association, can choose to run only constituency candidates and get into office by just winning electoral districts. The other is that national parties need to win at least 5% of the national vote to receive any seats in the Bundestag at all, a fact that is very important to these elections' results. If one fails to reach the 5% threshold, the seats that the party would have been entitled to are proportionally distributed to those who did pass that threshold. For ease of discussion, I'll be merging the CDU and CSU results as though they're one party, but the fact that the CSU received 5.97% of the vote this time around brings up the specter of interesting implications for Germany if they ever fall below the 5% national threshold in future elections. So, moving on to the results, the center-right conservative faction, the CDU-CSU, won 28.5% of the vote, and is set to enter into what is called a grand coalition with the center-left SPD, which won 16.4% of the vote, even though together they represent only around 45% of the popular vote. This is because the socially right, economically left, BSW received just 4.97% of the vote, and the centrist liberal FDP received 4.33% of the vote, meaning that alongside a bunch of other minor parties, a significant percentage of electoral representation was lost to parties falling below the electoral threshold. If either or both of those parties had made it in, the CDU, CSU, and the SPD would be forced to find a third partner to form a government. The reason for this is the CDU-CSU has categorically rejected working with the AfD, which received 28.8% of the vote, the second highest popular vote total in this election and the AfD's highest ever result. This is due to the AfD being a far-right party that has had several controversies where party members, at varying degrees of directness, defended fascism and fascists. Unsurprisingly, this has led to around 70% of the German electorate and around 80% of the CDU-CSU electorate being against a coalition being formed with their participation. The reason for their strong showing comes from broad frustration with the very real problems of the German status quo, paired with the scapegoating of immigration as the source of these problems, a very common political trope both globally and historically. Now, the AfD weren't the only beneficiaries of anti-status quo sentiment. The Democratic Socialist Die Linke party climbed from 2% in the polls to 8.8% in final results, pulling significantly from the center-left Green Party, which received 11.61% of the vote. Now, an in-deep dive into why these election results look the way they do is beyond the scope of this video. But there's one topic of note worth speaking about to bring this video to a close. The reason this early election was called at all, the so-called debt break. Put simply, the German constitution puts strict limitations on government's ability to run deficits, which has contributed to weak public spending on investment and military spending in Germany. The incoming chancellor and leader of the CDU, Friedrich Merz, wants to work with the pre-election Bundestag to reform the debt break, which is a constitutional amendment requires a two-thirds vote. This is presumably because the specific focus of this reform for the CDU would be to allow greater military spending to make up for U.S. withdrawal from Europe under Trump and increasing hostilities with Russia. The problem being that the AfD is quite pro-Russia and Die Linke is pacifist, making both parties probable obstacles to that sort of debt break reform. The CDU, CSU, and the SPD have had 3 4-year-long grand coalitions in the 21st century, so a grand coalition is likely to be stable but incapable of doing anything to satisfyingly improve German circumstances over the next 4 years, making it virtually certain that one or both of the AfD and Die Linke will see major increases in support in the run-up to the next election. As is the case all over the world, Germany is in for a turbulent future.